Welcome to Retro Video Playback and to episode 8 of Tape Talk Tuesday, an episodic video series where I showcase and discuss various movies on VHS. This episode I'll be showcasing Lords of Dogtown. I'm going to share a brief anecdote with you. I was recently looking at my shelf of VHS movies and a copy of the documentary Dogtown and Z-Boys caught my eye. That triggered me to think, do I own Lords of Dogtown on VHS? And you know how it is, you know what you own, but sometimes you might forget or you question yourself. My eyes scanned my tapes down to the L movies, and sure enough, I did not see Lords of Dogtown. Somewhat surprised by that, but also thinking, well, it came out in 2005, maybe it isn't even on VHS, since it's kind of that weird end of the VHS life cycle time period. So I pulled out my cell phone to search Lords of Dogtown on eBay, only to find that the cheapest listing available was over 160 Canadian dollars. Thinking, okay, I guess not, I put the thought of having Lords of Dogtown on VHS out of my mind. Fast forward about a week later and I'm back at my media shelves. This time I'm looking at a collection of VHS movies I have on a separate shelf, the shelf that contains my favorites. As my eyes scan from left to right, they come to a stop on, you guessed it, Lords of Dogtown. Clearly I had a space out moment the week prior thinking I didn't own it, and then as I laid eyes on it on my shelf, it came back to me. Back around 2012, prior to really getting into collecting, I only purchased copies of some of my favorite movies on VHS, one of them being Lords of Dogtown. So I went from thinking I owned Lords of Dogtown on VHS, to thinking I didn't and then I wouldn't be able to own it on VHS due to its high cost, to remembering I do already own it and probably paid around $20 for it, most of which would have been shipping costs. What a whirlwind. Getting into a detailed look of Lords of Dogtown on VHS, as always, we'll start with the front cover, where there's a lot happening. Running across the top are the actors who portray the main characters in the movie: Emile Hirsch, Victor Rasuk, John Robinson, and Heath Ledger. Just below this is the title of the movie in relatively plain and simple fonts. Next is a Mount Rushmore-esque close-up collage of the aforementioned actors in character. But this is one of my pet peeves. The names in the pictures don't line up accordingly. They're almost intentionally all misaligned, with Heath Ledger being under Emile Hirsch's name, John Robinson below Victor Rasuk's name, and so on. It's a common movie poster or cover art design, and I can't for the life of me understand the rationale behind it. Below the close-ups is another image featuring many characters in a pool setting. If you're unfamiliar with the movie, the characters find empty pools to skateboard in. We've got the 3 primary characters already featured above, joined this time by 3 other members of the Zephyr competition skateboard team, including Sid, who's featured pretty heavily through the film. Watching the group of skaters from outside the pool is Kathy, played by Nikki Reed, who would go on to Twilight fame just 3 years after the release of Lords of Dogtown. To the far lower left is a slogan: "They came from nothing to change everything," referring to the group of skateboarders who came mostly from rough upbringing and poverty, who went on to innovate and change skateboarding as a sport. Running along the very bottom of the front cover it reads, "Based on the true story of the legendary Z-Boys." This, as it suggests, refers to the movie being based on a true story. Based on the documentary I mentioned at the top of the video, Dogtown and Z-Boys, along with other videos and behind-the-scenes footage, this movie pretty accurately represents the real-life events that took place. This shouldn't come as a surprise, as the movie was written by Stacy Peralta, one of the main characters appearing in the movie. Though, Stacy has openly talked about being pushed to write a more dramatic and fantastical version of the real-life events. But you can see in real-life footage compared to shots from the movie that they did a really great job actually capturing major events down to the details of the clothing that's worn. The top of the box is a simple design with the same Lords of Dogtown print as the front cover, just with inverse colors. The spines have the same logo as well. At the top and the bottom of the spines, we've got 2 different pictures and company logos. On one spine, there's a surfer looking out into the water, and a Columbia Pictures logo, and on the other is Emile Hirsch as Jay skateboarding up a ramp while his friends look on, and a Sony Home Pictures logo. The back side of the sleeve is just as busy as the front, beginning with a quote from Peter Travers of Rolling Stone, declaring Lords of Dogtown to be a dazzling daredevil ride. The write-up reads, "Lords of Dogtown tells the radical true story behind 3 teenage surfers from Venice Beach, California, who took skateboarding to the extreme and changed the world of sports forever. Stacy Peralta, Tony Alva, and Jay Adams are the Z-Boys, a bunch of nobodies until they create a new style of skateboarding that becomes a worldwide phenomenon. But when their hobby becomes a business, the success shreds their friendship." Directed by Catherine Hardwicke and written by Stacy Peralta, Lords of Dogtown is so good, I came out of the theater only wanting one thing: to see it again. And that's a quote from Henry Rollins of Henry's Film Corner. I also presume that to be Henry Rollins, the musician and actor. Next to the write-up is an image that appears to be from the same shoot or scene that we saw on the front cover, with the Z-Boys skating in the pool and Kathy looking on. Below this shot is a film reel-esque collage of stills from the movie. From left to right is Kathy, Johnny Knoxville as Topper with Tony Alva, Sid with America Ferrera as Thunder Monkey, and then Jay, Tony, and Sid. The bottom quarter to a third is covered with the various fine print information, including production credits and logos, copyright information, the PG-13 rating, but also PG Canada rating, which is interesting. There's also a runtime of 107 minutes, printed in USA, and in roughly the center we have a couple of additional items. LordsofDogtown.com, which is surprisingly still up and running nearly 20 years after the release of this movie, SonyPictures.com, and the soundtrack on Geffen Records. I have the soundtrack here on CD. It's a solid soundtrack of 70s rock, but there's also a 2000s song by the band Rise Against, who make an appearance in the movie. Running along the very bottom of the sleeve to close the back out, it reads, "This film has been modified from its original version. It has been formatted to fit your TV." Moving on to the tape, it has graphics inked on, with the familiar Lords of Dogtown logo flanked by all sorts of information. The VHS number, the runtime, VHS Hi-Fi and Dolby Surround logos, FBI anti-piracy warning, copyright information, PG-13 rating, a closed captions icon, and a Sony Pictures logo. My copy of the movie has a sticker for what I presumed was a video rental store, but a search online revealed nothing but other than what appears to be a grocery store. I watched this Lords of Dogtown VHS for the first time for the purpose of this video. I'd previously only ever watched it digitally on DVD or Blu-ray. The tape starts out with upcoming theatrical releases, including The Legend of Zorro, Rent, and Into the Blue, followed by movies
coming soon to DVD and video,
including Bewitched, which only states on DVD, not on video or VHS, an indicator that at the time we were coming to an end of the life cycle of VHS. Bewitched is followed by a trailer for Stealth. And then finally our movies available now on home video, including Jiminy Glick in La La Wood, and the documentary I previously mentioned, Dogtown and Z-Boys. Despite being, relatively speaking, a modern release on VHS, because the movie takes place in the 1970s, like I've said about previous period movies that I've discussed on Tape Talk Tuesday, Lords of Dogtown feels at home on VHS. At the same time, while watching the movie on VHS, at times it felt somewhat contained on the smaller aspect ratio, and the movie really opens up on a modern, large TV. Ultimately, it's a movie where the different formats have their pros and cons, but is indeed watchable on all formats. Lords of Dogtown is a movie that I feel had a moment in the spotlight, but by no means remains a popular movie. It was released on DVD at the same time as this VHS in late 2005, then eventually made its way to Blu-ray 10 years later in 2015, though that version appears to be somewhat uncommon. An extended Blu-ray was released in 2018, which I have here. Then in November 2023, a Steelbook Blu-ray was released. So it's not to say that Lords of Dogtown isn't a popular movie. Clearly there's a fan base if they continue to re-release it, but it's one of those movies that I just never see or hear talked about. I once considered Lords of Dogtown to be one of my top 5 movies of all time. Over the years, it's moved down the list, but it still maintains a special place for me, and watching it brings me back to my teens and my 20s when I watched it semi-regularly. Its accuracy and its representation of the real-life events is refreshing because supposed biographical films are far too often exaggerated and dramatized versions that no longer reflect the real-life events. With that, we find ourselves at the end of our discussion of Lords of Dogtown on VHS and the end of episode 8 of Tape Talk Tuesday. This copy of Lords of Dogtown on VHS is, to my knowledge, the most expensive VHS in my collection, something I didn't even know until last week. Do you have any valuable tapes in your collection? Let me know. Thanks for watching Retro Video Playback.